Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Brett King about the disruption to labor markets from AI and the core skills needed to thrive in the 21st century. Brett King, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm super excited for the conversation today. We're going to be talking about disruption to labor markets from AI and the core skills needed to thrive in the 21st century. Now, clearly, there's all these technological disruptions happening in the world around us, and add on top of that things like the pandemic and push towards utilizing more technologies and adapting to remote work and hybrid work, distributed workforce, all of that. All of this leads into labor markets. But a big piece of that, again, comes back to AI and deep machine learning. So we're going to unpack that. And then what does that all mean for the future of work? What does that mean for the skills needed to thrive in the 21st century? If more and more we have not only robotics, but AI, machine learning, and various technologies that can displace a lot of the tasks that we used to do, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What does it mean for what we need to be able to do in the future to be relevant in the world of work? As we get started, I want to share Brett's bio with everybody. Brett King is an internationally best-selling author, a world-renowned futurist, and media personality. He has spoken in over 50 countries, given keynotes for TEDx, Wired, TechSauce, Singularity, University, Web Summit, The Economist, IBM's World of Watson, CES, and much, much more. He has appeared on CNBC, BBC, ABC, Fox, and Bloomberg. King hosts the world's #1 fintech radio show and podcast called Breaking Banks in 180 countries with 6.5 million listeners. That's awesome. And he is the founder of Movin, a globally recognized mobile startup, which has raised over 40 million to date and launched the first in-app mobile bank account offered anywhere in the world. What a wonderful background, a tremendous background and skill set. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background before we dive on in further?
And I write, I just published my 7th book. So, it's good to have multiple income streams, I guess, right?
For sure. That's awesome. And I'll give you a chance later. We can talk a little bit about your book and
No,
feel free to share that with listeners as well. So let's start with disruption to labor markets from AI. Now, again, tons of disruption, tons of things disrupting the workplace and disrupting labor markets right now. And it's a really interesting type labor market right now. And it's difficult for organizations to find good talent. But you just add to the mix, you add AI and deep machine learning. So tell us a little bit more about the impacts of AI on the labor markets today.
Well, I think a lot of people sort of miss this. Technology has always changed the nature of employment. So even the steam engine, it changed agriculture. If you look at the pre-industrial age, United States, like 75 to 80% of employment was agriculture based. Today, it's like 1.6%. And so that's happened because of technology. The combustion engine, steam engine initially, then the combustion engine, and then various technologies associated with that. So it's not unusual to be talking about the fact that technology will disrupt. But in terms of AI, the big shift there is that, when we look at core economics and the way we think about human capital in core economics, since 1776 with Wealth of Nations from Adam Smith, the assumption has always been that if demand for a product or service increases, the way you create supply is putting more labor into the process. Yes, you need more raw materials and so forth as well, but human capital is a core component to that. What AI is attempting to do is take the human component out of a number of core processes in our economy when it comes to that supply and demand curve. And so, if you look at the purpose of AI's purpose is really to eliminate humans from the workforce in terms of the typical view of work. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that work disappears, but it does mean that work has the potential to change significantly. What we will remove is humans acting like robots, humans doing repeatable processes, tasks and things that, we can train robots for. So this then leads us to seeing human capital in respect to labor markets very differently. It has to be much more creative aligned, it has to be working with technology, but the potential for work itself to change is pretty significant. And so, I'm sure we're going to get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And as you mentioned, I mean, technology is always disrupted. People talk about how we're in the fourth stage, the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution, right? And we're just talking about different types of technologies, different types of disruptions today, excuse me, than perhaps we saw, in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. But it's the same general kind of disruption. And I like how you distinguish, though, how AI can, in large part, displace human beings in a lot of the types of work. But it's the type of work that, frankly, I mean, do I really want to be doing it in the first place?
This is really the key point, right?
Yeah.
Is that yeah, sorry.
Go for it. Go for it.
No. So I think when I talk about disruption of labor markets and disruption of work by AI, a lot of people, get very perturbed about that. And they, there's a lot of debate that goes on about, is AI really going to destroy jobs and so forth? Look, the reality is it's already destroying jobs. And so if you extend that curve as AI gets better, then it's obviously that the breadth of the jobs that it disrupts is going to be broader. But that leads us to the fact that, as you've rightly identified, a lot of work that people do today is not necessarily very meaningful. It's work that puts money on the table. It enables us to put a roof over our head and so forth, but, it's not necessarily things that we are passionate about and so forth. This is where I think AI's true benefit to human society, and it's a very philosophical approach, is that the nature of work must adapt. So in the future, if AI has, displaced 80% of work, that humans do today. And that by the end of this century, that's where we sort of predict it to be. Certainly by the 2040s, it's going to be about half of the jobs that we currently have. Now, a lot of new jobs are going to be created, robot psychologists, robot repairmen, all these sort of things. But ultimately, what we're going to have to grapple with is that supply and demand curve. Humans are not going to be critical to those core economics. Now, that's going to create incredible wealth. Highly automated societies are going to be incredibly wealthy. And that wealth can be deployed in terms of basic services, things like universal basic income and so forth. And when we've got that, core wealth in society created by highly autonomous economies, that enables us to choose what we want to do. Right. And so, if you've got a UBI structure, which most entrepreneurs talk about as a necessary outcome of highly automated societies, then you can work at what you're passionate about. You can work at things that really make a difference. And so when we looked at 72 UBI trials globally when we were doing research for our new book. And, the one thing that emerges out of that is what you get a lot of criticism from on conservative fronts is that if you give people stimulus payments or UBI and things like that, they aren't incentivized to work. Actually, actually the trials that we've seen bore out exactly the opposite. So you have a higher rate of entrepreneurship where people create their own businesses at 2 or 3 times the normal rate of society when they have UBI in the mix. People get a lot more involved in community action and things that can impact people around them. So, automation and AI like this combined with UBI or something like it is really going to create this ability for us to change the role of work in society, where it's something we're really passionate about that really is going to make a difference rather than something that puts food on the table.
Yeah, I love it. I completely agree with everything you just said. That's kind of the common thing, dialogue that I often share with people as well. Will AI, machine learning, robotics, other forms of disruptive technologies displace some types of tasks and even some whole jobs, even some careers? Yes, it will. But is it the type of work we want to be doing in the first place?
Exactly.
For most people, the answer is no. And there will always be opportunity for human beings to do meaningful, creative work. It's going to unlock new possibilities, new opportunities in many ways that we haven't even conceived of yet. And that's super exciting to me. And I think about just, the work that I do. I do things like this podcast. I do a lot of the same things you do, actually. I write and I do consulting work. I do speaking, but I'm a university professor. And that's really kind of my bread and butter. That's my main gig. And then I do all these other things on the side. And just my role as a university professor over the last 10 years has changed quite dramatically. And when I first, came out of grad school, I got my PhD and I go and I'm teaching my first classes, I'm having students literally hand and paper assignments. And then I'm like using a red pen, marking it up, grading grammar and doing all that kind of stuff. And grading is like the worst. I
did my stint as an adjunct for a couple of different universities, so I'm absolutely familiar with it, John.
Yeah, grading's not really why most people like teaching, or if people become professors, they want to do research, they want to teach, they want to mentor students, do those sorts of meaningful things, and they don't want to spend a ton of time grading crummy papers. And if I am grading papers, I want to spend most of my time on the conceptual ideas of the students and helping them to further thinking, not wasting time on comma placement and those sorts of things. And what has happened in the last 10, 15 years? There's technology that does that. So my students don't turn in a paper, like a physical printed paper anymore. They upload it to a learning management system, and it then goes through various technologies to check for things like plagiarism, but also to give them feedback on their grammar and their spelling and their usage, those sorts of things. So they get all that feedback back almost instantaneously. And then the grading that I do is largely content-based, conceptual, idea-based, and helping them think through things. And I can do much more interesting types of assignments as well with the technologies that are around, so that the time that I spend as an instructor, as a professor at the university, in my full-time job, it's largely as a coach, as a mentor, as a facilitator, and a curator of knowledge and information for the students, to prepare them with the skills necessary to be successful in the future of work and their future careers. And that is exciting to me. And I would much rather spend my time doing those things than being essentially, a grader. And there are so many instructors and professors that still to this day spend a lot of their time doing those sorts of menial tasks. If we can get AI and other types of programs to do that, all the better. And that's just one little sliver of an example of the type of work that's been, the tasks that have been displaced. It just opens me up to so much more possibility and meaningful work. And I love it.
There's two issues we're increasingly going to have to deal with that also have impact here. The first is just financial inclusion and inequality, increasing inequality. So as technology becomes more pervasive in society and automation ramps up,
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Academy, courses, micro-credentials, and certificates to upskill and reskill for the future of work. All HCI Academy courses, micro-credentials, and certificates are designed, developed, and delivered by award-winning and internationally renowned scholars, educators, thought leaders, executives, and practitioners. Our courses, micro-credentials, and certificates will help you make your mark on the future of work and make an immediate impact in your organizations. Check out the HCI Academy and our many course offerings and certificates to upskill and reskill for the future of work. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us.
The gap between those participating in the tech market versus those in the old world, industrial sort of scale, the gap in terms of salaries and wealth and so forth increases to grow. So that's a problem that we have to address, and we can see during the pandemic, for example, the world's billionaires, so their wealth surpassed $10 trillion for the first time. The richest Americans, their wealth increased by $1.6 trillion, meaning that the richest 0.1% of American society now own more than the bottom 90%. So that's an untenable situation, and automation could make that worse. So we have to figure out a mechanism for fixing that at an economics level. But the second piece, which is sort of we're going to throw in the mix here, is by the mid-2030s, climate mitigation and response to climate change is going to be a massive industry. By the 2050s, we're talking about potentially half of the world's GDP deployed on climate mitigation, particularly around sea level rise and crop failures and things like that. So you've got massive industrial employment opportunities coming from the climate side of things in the second half of the century. So you've got a lot of changes compressed into a fairly short period of time. The Industrial Revolution took really sort of 170 years or so to really sort of change society, from the birth of things like the steam engine to the end of the 20th century. This is going to happen over the space of 20 years, and so that's 20 to 30 years. So that rate of change is going to be intense. So I think it comes back to, a lot of this comes back to the fact that we're going to have to do some navel gazing as a society in terms of, what is it about our economies that's important? Is GDP growth core, or is the happiness and health of the populace, core? And if we look at the way we measure economies in the past, if you look at those measures that economists talk about, GDP, trade surpluses, full employment, and so forth, then the US is the most successful economy the world has ever seen. But if you say, does the economy cater for the core needs of the citizens? Access to education, access to healthcare, access to food and housing, all of those sort of things, then there's an argument to be made that the US is a demonstrable failure in that respect. I mean, the US has, more people living under the poverty line than Mexico, on a net basis. And so this really, when we start to see the impact of automation changing employment, if you don't have the economy supporting those core basic needs of citizens, then that economic function becomes much more obvious in terms of the fact that the economy is prioritized towards generating wealth for the wealthiest of society, rather than generating affluence for society in general. And you can see there's a very interesting sort of philosophical debate going on now with China talking about this prosperity doctrine versus the US talking about, we've got a supercharge, capitalism is it. But we're starting to see sort of limitations in the core capitalist model because of AI and automation that we have to really sort of rethink. And it doesn't mean capitalism is going to disappear, but there's definitely economic reform in terms of inclusion that's more critical as you get more and more automation. I hope that's not too
No, that's
economic theory-ish.
no, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I thought maybe we could double click on the UBI element for a minute, because I think that's super interesting. And my guess is it's not something that most of my listeners have thought all that much about. So universal basic income, in the last presidential election cycle, there was some talk about this.
Right. Andrew Yang ran on it, right?
Yeah, that was like his complete platform. Basically, it's a really compelling, interesting
freedom dividends, he called it. Yeah, it's brilliant branding, actually.
It's an interesting argument. Tell us a little bit more about your thinking around universal basic income as we move into the future economy, the future of work. Because again, let's assume for a second that we're not talking about like future dystopian society, like Terminator type of realities due to AI, but we're talking more about positive potential from AI in developing our economies and developing our own work life, our own experience in society, where we have more time for leisure, we have more time for hobbies, we have more time for meaningful work, we can start new companies, we can provide more products and services enabled through the technology that we have. So if we're in that kind of a situation, that kind of a future, which is what I think we'll end up in, not this dystopian kind of future that fear mongering pushes forward, then what role does universal basic income have? And how would you respond to someone who would say, well, that seems completely ridiculous and untenable from like an economic, political, philosophy? Yeah, it's socialism, right?
No. Well, we've got an entire chapter on this in the new book. It's called Revolution Risk Management. And that is, if you look at historical precedents of the gap between the rich and the poor that we see in economies like the US, UK, Australia at the moment, that in the past that has led to
Oh, you just went muted.
Sorry. In the past that has led to either legislated redistribution of wealth or revolution. And so that's what history teaches us. And so if we're going to deploy more and more AI, which the capital markets reward companies for doing because they get more profits out of those companies, then the market is going to generate less and less human jobs and more algorithm and AI based and or autonomous jobs or functions in the society, because that's productivity, core productivity in corporations. 9 of the 10 largest corporations in the world today are technology companies, and they employ far less people than the equivalent blue chip industrial 20th century leaders that had huge human labor workforce. So that's the trajectory we're on. So then the question becomes, if you have all of these people that are displaced by automation, how do you deal with that? Well, you can retrain them for jobs that are now current. So STEM training and things like that becomes very critical. But in that transition of economies from industrial economies to highly automated 21st century economies, obviously you're going to have a lot of people that are put out of work. And so you need a safety net. So this is why we talk about a universal basic income. Everyone getting $1,500 or $2,000 a month, enough to live off, and things like healthcare and education provided free, to the economy because of the wealth that's created by the autonomy. So how do you pay for UBI? Well, we came up with 4 methods. The first is you could fund it by these big tech companies that are massively profitable. I mean, look at Apple. They went from, they're now a $2-3 trillion company, Microsoft. So the amount of wealth that these technology companies capture, that could partially, we could have something, for example, that every human you eliminate from the workforce, you now need to create a job program that provides them with, some future employment. So that would not necessarily be UBI, but it would be a job creation program supported by the wealth that's created by displacing humans, right? Secondly, just the wealth generated by artificial intelligence. We believe that this could this could double the wealth in the American economy over the next 20 years, in terms of wealth capture. We could create central bank digital currencies that we could use for universal basic income, sort of a secondary monetary supply in some respects. And then we could use things like technology reform, climate mitigation, and other things like that to create massive job programs, again, funded by the wealth that's created from highly autonomous societies. So there's some of the ways that we could find to pay for this. But ultimately, what automation does is automation will massively improve resource allocation. It'll make corporations and therefore economies massively more profitable. So that wealth, we just have to make sure that that wealth is distributed more evenly into the system than it is today, because of the way capital markets and so forth work.
Yeah, and to your point, if someone is saying, well, that's just socialism, and from an economic philosophical perspective, that's disastrous. Many people would share that kind of a perspective.
Let me give you one quick illustration, John,
yes, please.
That sort of it dispels that argument. Right. So let's look at healthcare in the United States. Right. So compared with the OECD average, the United States pays twice the OECD average for healthcare. In respect to outcomes in the United States are often worse than, say, the Nordic regions and parts of Europe in respect to healthcare outcomes. Right. But on the cost basis, when we talk about something like universal healthcare, we get a lot of pushback because it's as perceived as socialism. What we show in the new book, The Rise of Techno-Socialism, is that we could reduce the cost of healthcare, the total cost of healthcare in the United States, by 70% with a range of new technologies. So artificial intelligence used in diagnosis, 40% of diagnoses of conditions in the United States is incorrect. That's why you always ask for a second opinion. 40% of the cost of the healthcare system today is administrative costs. We could eliminate most of that with robotic process automation. Then you get into things like gene therapy and personalized medicine and other technologies like that, that again radically change the effectiveness of healthcare. So this is what I would call capitalism at its best. The fact that if we apply these technologies to healthcare, we end up with universal healthcare model where healthcare is free to every American at 30% of the current system costs. So then the question is, why would you ever argue against that? I mean, what could possibly be an argument in getting lower cost of the total system in terms of taxes and providing everyone with better outcomes? I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about here. Highly automated governments that are just more efficient at providing services to citizens.
Yeah, and I hope we can get past, kind of our current political ideologies to think about these arguments, right? And that's why I was, kind of the devil advocate kind of argument, and I think is essentially a straw man argument, and you just responded to it very well. We need to get outside of our limited ideologies and recognize that the future is going to be different than what we've experienced in the past, and our current ways of doing things will, as you described earlier, the historical track record is you end up with revolution. Either governments will proactively put in place policies that will allow for a more equitable distribution, or you end up with revolutions, and we don't want that. So anyways, all super interesting. Not ideal. Brett, it has been a real pleasure talking with you. I note the time, I'm going to have to let you go, but before we part ways today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can connect with you, where they can find out more about what you're doing, where they can find your book, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So you can go to brettking.com, /T, and you can find my website, which will give you access to sort of my platforms. In terms of the book, it's called The Rise of Techno-Socialism. You can go to riseoftechnosocialism.com or technosocialism.com if you want to find out a little bit more about the book. We chose the title. It's a little bit controversial because of the word, but we're really talking about sort of optimal humanity and techno collective, it's very techno optimistic. So by all means, check it out. You can follow me on Twitter at Brett King. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and those other platforms as well. But I really appreciate the opportunity, John. It's been a great discussion.
Yeah. So much fun. Thank you, Brett. It's been a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Brett can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership, the journey of becoming a truly remarkable leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There is no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of your problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.